presentation, we'll be discussing multicultural counseling from both an ethical and a biblical perspective. The ideas come from Counseling the Culturally Diverse by Daryl Wing Sue and Confronting Injustice Without Compromising Truth by Thaddeus J. Williams. Over time, counseling has become more than just applying techniques. Today, counselors are expected to understand the whole person, including their cultural background, identity, environment, and belief systems. This matters because people do not experience life in isolation. Every part of who they are shapes how they think, feel, and respond. Because of this, multicultural counseling is essential. Without it, counselors risk misunderstanding clients or overlooking important influences, which can lead to ineffective care. In this presentation, we will focus on three main areas. First, cultural competency and self-awareness, understanding the client's background while also recognizing our own biases. Second, addressing oppression and systemic injustice, acknowledging how larger societal factors impact mental health and how counselors can support their clients. Third, integrating faith into counseling in an ethical and respectful way, especially when spirituality is an important part of the client's life. Throughout the presentation, we will connect these ideas to the ACA Code of Ethics, the AACC Code of Ethics, and biblical principles. This shows how professional standards and faith-based perspectives can work together. Overall, the goal is to show how counselors can provide care that is effective, culturally responsive, ethnically grounded, and spiritually sensitive when appropriate.
Cultural competency is a core foundation of effective counseling. It means recognizing that a client's cultural background shapes their identity, beliefs, behaviors, and overall worldview. Every client enters counseling with experiences influenced by culture. This affects how they define problems, how they cope with stress, and how comfortable they feel seeking help. Because of this, counselors cannot assume their own perspective is universal. For example, communication styles can differ across cultures. In some cultures, direct communication is valued, while in others, being indirect is seen as more respectful. A counselor expecting directness might misinterpret a client indirect style as avoidance, when it's actually a cultural norm. Family involvement is another example. Some cultures emphasize collective decision making rather than individual independence. If a counselor focuses only on personal autonomy, they may overlook an important part of the client's support system. These examples shows that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. Counselors must adapt their approaches based on each client cultural context. This connects to self-awareness. Counselors bring their own beliefs, values, and assumptions into sessions, and these can shape how they interpret a client behavior or choosing intervention. Without awareness, a counselor may label something as a problem simply because it differs from their own norms. That's why ongoing reflections is important. Counselors should ask themselves, what assumption am I making? How is my background influencing my interpretation? Am I truly listening or filtering this through my own perspective? In addition, many clients face stressors related to their cultural identity, such as discrimination, microaggression, or limited access to resources. These experiences may not always be obvious, but they can strongly impact mental health. For instance, a client may present with anxiety, but that anxiety could be linked to ongoing experience of discrimination. If a counselor focus only on symptoms and ignore context, they may miss a key part of their issue. Of Ethically, the responsibility is clearly emphasized. The ACA Code of Ethics states that counselors should not be impose their values on client, must use culturally appropriate assessments, and should only practice within an area where are competent. It also highlights that the importance of understanding cultural difference in communication. The AACC Code of Ethics reinforces these ideas by emphasizing respect, dignity, and cultural awareness. Both sets of guidelines remind us that counseling should always center the client. Overall, cultural competency and self-awareness are essential for ethical and effective counseling by understanding our clients' cultural backgrounds and reflecting on our own biases. We can provide more respectful and meaningful care.
Combating oppression and seeking justice, the key point focuses on the role of counselors in recognizing and responding to oppression and systemic injustice. Many of the challenges clients face are not just individual problems. They are often connected to larger systems such as economic inequality, racism, discrimination, and limited access to resources. These systemic issues can shape a person's opportunities, stress levels, and overall mental health. For example, a client struggling with depression may also be dealing with job insecurity or a lack of access to healthcare. These external factors can play a major role in their emotional state. If counselors ignore these influences, they risk placing all the responsibility on the client, which can lead to ineffective treatment and even frustration. This is why it's important for counselors to understand the bigger picture. As Sue explains, counselors need to recognize how these systems impact individuals. This does not mean counselors are expected to fix the systemic issues, but they do need to acknowledge them and respond in a meaningful way. One important way counselors can respond is through advocacy. Advocacy can take different forms, such as helping clients access resources, supporting them as they navigate difficult systems, or empowering them to speak up for themselves. For instance, a counselor might help a client find community resources, connect with connect them with support services, or offer guidance on handling discrimination in the workplace. These actions can make a real difference in a client's life beyond the counseling session. At the same time, Williams provides an important balance. He emphasized that while justice matters, counselors must be careful not to let their personal agendas take over. The focus should always remain on the client's needs, not the counselor's personal beliefs or opinions. This is where ethical guidelines become especially important. The ACA Code of Ethics clearly supports advocacy. For example, it encourages counselors to advocate for their clients and emphasize that the client's well-being should always come first. It also prohibits discrimination and reminds counselors to avoid causing harm. Similarly, the AACC Code of Ethics highlights the importance of justice, integrity, and responsibility, especially when working with vulnerable populations. These guidelines reinforce the idea that counselors should respond to injustice while still maintaining professionalism and care. There's also a strong biblical connection to this idea. In Micah 6:8, believers are called to act justly and love mercy. In Isaiah 1:17, there is a call to defend those who are oppressed. Together, these verses emphasize that justice and compassion should go hand in hand. So, overall, addressing oppression in counseling means recognizing the impact of systemic issues while staying grounded in ethical practice. Counselors should support and advocate for their clients, but always keep the focus on the client's well being.
The final key point focuses on the integration of faith into counseling. For many clients, spirituality is a central part of their identity. It can shape how they cope with challenges, how they find meaning in difficult situations, and how they make important life decisions. Because of this, ignoring a client's spiritual beliefs can mean overlooking a significant part of who they are. At the same time, integrating faith into counseling must be done carefully and ethically. It's not something counselors can assume or automatically include. Instead, it should be it should always be guided by the client's preferences and level of comfort. One of the most important aspects of this process is informed consent. Consent. I'm sorry. Counselors need to clearly explain if and how faith based elements might be incorporated into sessions. This gives clients the opportunity to decide whether they are open to that approach. This step is important because it respects the client's autonomy. It ensures that counseling remains client centered rather than being influenced by the counselor's personal beliefs. Even if a counselor has strong spiritual values, those should never be imposed onto the client. When clients are open to integrating faith, it can be done in meaningful and supportive ways. For example, a counselor might include prayer, discuss scripture, or explore the client's spiritual beliefs as part of the healing process. For many individuals, these practices can provide comfort, strength, and a sense of hope. Faith can also help clients reframe their experiences, find purpose in challenges, and feel more connected to something greater than themselves. This can be especially helpful during times of stress, grief, or uncertainty. However, it's important to keep in mind that faith should not replace professional counseling techniques. Counselors still have a responsibility to use evidence based practices and apply sound clinical judgment. Spiritual integration should complement counseling, not take the place of it. The balance is where ethical guidelines play a key role. The ACA Code of Ethics emphasizes several important responsibilities in this area. Counselors must avoid imposing their own values, obtain informed consent, and respect each client's cultural and spiritual background. These principles help ensure that the counseling process remains respectful and appropriate. Similarly, the AACC Code of Ethics highlights the importance of using spiritual interventions responsibly. It stresses respect for client autonomy and maintaining professional integrity. This means counselors must be thoughtful and intentional when incorporating faith into their work. There's also a strong biblical connection to this approach. In Colossians 3:23, there is an encouragement to work with sincerity and excellence, which can be applied to providing ethical and dedicated care in counseling. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, scripture is described as a source of guidance and truth, which supports its role when clients choose to uh, include it in their healing process. These two verses, they reflect the idea that faith can be meaningful and powerful, but it should be used in a way that aligns with both ethical practice and the client's needs. So overall, faith can be valuable. Faith can be a valuable part of counseling when it is integrated thoughtfully. By respecting the client's choices, obtaining consent, and maintaining professional standards, counselors can incorporate spirituality in a way that is both ethical and supportive.
And in conclusion, multicultural counseling requires more than just knowing techniques. It requires awareness, intentionality, and a strong commitment to ethical responsibility. In this presentation, we discussed three key areas: cultural competency, addressing oppression and justice, and the integration of faith. Each of these play an important role in providing effective counseling. As counselors, it's important to stay aware of our own biases, understand our clients' cultural backgrounds, and recognize how larger systemic factors may be affecting their lives. At the same time, when faith is part of the counseling process, it must be integrated carefully, always respecting the client's beliefs, choices, and autonomy. When all of these elements come together, counseling becomes more than just solving problems. It becomes a process that supports the whole person emotionally, culturally, and when appropriate, spiritually. Ultimately, effective counseling is about meeting clients where they are and helping them move forward in a way that promotes growth, dignity, and overall well-being.